proposed development will include housing, retail, art studio space, light industrial use, and community green spaces. And it will also provide a new custom-designed home for the Boulder Museum of Contemporary Art. During a presentation on the project, Boulder principal planner Chandler Von Schack said the area is located within the North Boulder Art District, an, quote, inclusive grassroots community dedicated to promoting artists and creative businesses. The site plan includes 17,500 square feet of museum space, 17,500 square feet of storefront commercial space, 67 residential units, and 96 parking spaces. However, Van Schack noted some changes to land use and zoning in the area would be necessary to allow the museum to be built on the site and to allow for the proposed residential density. He said that if council members supported making land use and zoning changes, they might need to look at creating a new flex zone district to accommodate the project, and the council would need to direct city staff to start work on that process. And that is from the Boulder Daily Camera this past February. And of course, what project are we talking about? We are talking about the new Boulder Art Museum, located at 4707. Did I get the address right, Hamish? 4707 Broadway. I'm going on memory here on the address.
I thought it was 4401.
Maybe it's 4401. We're talking about the corner of Broadway and Violet. And with that, welcome to the House Einstein Podcast.
Welcome.
This podcast is dedicated to helping you make a smarter real estate decision. That is our mission at the House Einstein Brokerage. But for podcasting purposes, if you are listening to this, please consider this podcast entertainment. Our attorneys would prefer that. And if you are a House Einstein client, if you're a client of our brokerage here in Colorado, reach out to us directly. Talk to your agent when you need real estate advice. Otherwise, enjoy the show.
Perfect. Well, what topics are we talking about today? I know we covered one pretty briefly in the intro, Oz.
That's right. So we will be talking about that development of the new museum, and I still think that address is 4707, but maybe you can look for it while I'm walking people through the topics du jour. So today's topics du jour are our usual segment, Tell Me Something I Don't Know. And in this segment, we'll be talking about buyer archetypes for listings and thinking about telling a better story in your marketing. We're going to cover market conditions. That's our next segment. And we'll be drilling down specifically on one neighborhood and property type in Boulder. And then we'll briefly do our usual shameless self-promotion, where we talk about some of the deals and projects that House Einstein agents are currently working on. We will cover sales of the week. We have 5 of them this week to walk you through. Sales of the week are intended to help you understand market conditions and neighborhoods, to illustrate trends in the industry, and to give you a little peek behind the curtain on what might have actually gone down in these particular deals. And then we will hit our segment called In the News. And in the news, there's a couple of different things that I think we will entertain you with, including details on this BMOCA plan development, as well as the news that Erie and Boulder are getting set to approve a trail that connects the two. This is something I strongly am in support of, is more connectivity off of our roadways for bicycle users, gravel bike users, hikers, walkers, all of that stuff. And then, of course, a little open secret that you might have known. We're going to talk about the Pearl Street Mall Crawl, which should have happened by the time you actually listen to this podcast. And then we'll do our carve-outs before we wrap up.
Perfect. Yeah, a few things in there. Well, the mall crawl specifically, I've never heard of. So I'm kind of excited to cover that topic.
How is that possible? How many years have you lived here?
I know. I know. And yeah, never heard of it. So
I think it might be a generational thing.
it probably could be. But then looking at the pictures and everything, you know, when we were putting together the notes, it looks like there's some youth activity there. So maybe I'm just out of the mailer boundary or something.
Maybe.
But,
maybe you're out of the bubble far enough that you don't know about it.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So it never died, but for me, it's never lived. So. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Alrighty. Well, first topic du jour is tell me something I don't know and buy our archetypes for selling your home.
This podcast is sponsored by House Einstein. We serve buyers and sellers in Colorado, focusing on Boulder, Denver, and several mountain resort towns, including Breckenridge and Winter Park. Our mission is simple: help you make a smarter real estate decision. You can learn more at houseeinstein.com or our YouTube channel, where you'll find videos on neighborhoods, specific listings, and much, much more. So, as some of you may know, we have invested in a significant amount of resources, not just in the equipment and the skills of marketing real estate listings with videography. I mean, we've done professional photography since the very beginning, but we more recently, about 10 years ago, started to delve into video, and about 3 years ago, we went full in-house with most of our video production. And one of the most important things that we spend time thinking about when we have been asked to market a listing, when a seller has reached out to us and chosen our brokerage to represent them, is to think about the story of that sale, the story of what might attract a potential buyer. And the most important component of that is to consider who is the likely buyer of this property and how can we adjust our marketing plan, not just the photos, but the video story itself, to more broadly appeal to that particular buyer. And it's really important to be careful here because real estate has a history of discriminatory behavior. And there are fair housing laws to think about that constrict some of our marketing activities. So, for example, you may not know that when you place an ad for real estate on social media, you can't just place it for a particular zip code. You have to place it for a broader region that has enough people to encompass the diversity that would allow you to escape a discriminatory claim that you're only marketing this particular property to a certain protected class. And that includes income, which technically I don't think is a protected class, but clearly the social media companies have said that you can't choose only wealthy buyers to market your Boulder listings to. You have to shotgun it to everybody in the Denver metro area, irrespective of age, irrespective of gender, irrespective of any of those potentially challenging classes, right? I guess that's probably the right word. So when we think about archetypes, we have to be careful to also make sure that when we go to market the property, we aren't creating something that creates fair housing risk, fair housing liability for us or for the seller. But at the same time, it's important to be really honest about what type of buyer is likely going to be interested in this property. So for example, if it's a property that's multi-level, meaning that it's a tri-level or a bi-level, it is full of stairs. And the likelihood that somebody who is elderly would be interested in this property is not quite there, right?
Yeah.
Like it's probably not likely. And those types of properties, multi-level properties that are not a traditional two-story, are less appealing. Like it's a much smaller market segment. So who might be interested in that property? Lots of people with kids actually like bi-levels because the lower level is not in a dark basement which has no light. It has half a flight of stairs to the main living area. So when they're hanging out in the main living area, there's connectivity to the lower level and they can hear their kids playing. Yeah. It doesn't feel like, I mean, it's sort of funny because as a kid, my parents' dinner parties, they sent us to the basement.
Oh yeah.
Because we wouldn't have been heard. And we were instructed that if you were coming upstairs to talk to the adults, there better be a really good reason.
And you're on your best behavior.
And exactly, you're on your best behavior. But I think we grew up in slightly different time periods, Hamish, and and it's gotten a little bit different. Kids are now much more the centerpiece of the entertainment. It's not just adults and throw the kids on the main level and throw the kids in the basement. But so it's important to consider that when you're discussing and preparing your marketing plan. So there's certain properties, for example, that are very close to CU, and they are very likely to attract a parent who is interested and can afford Boulder prices to buy a place for their kid to live in the 4 years or longer, potentially, that they will be living here, and maybe share that space with roommates. And so when we come up with our video plan of what we're featuring in that video, making sure we talk about the proximity to the campus, the ease in which you can access the campus, perhaps the safety of that property. So for example, some of our listeners may not know that there are parts of town that are much more prone to parties. That's where the fraternities and the sororities are, hint, hint, that you're very likely to have a party environment there frequently on the weekends. And if you are like my parents were, they would probably want to be as far away from that as possible with purchasing a CU kiddie condo. They would want to be on the other side of town, where you're closer to the research part of the university and you're far, far away from the fraternity and nightlife of CU. So all of that comes into play when we're talking about archetypes. And some properties, so for example, we are likely going under contract today on a property that has a main level master suite. We now call them primary suites. My apologies. No longer are we allowed to call them master suites.
I didn't even catch that. Yeah.
I know. I keep stumbling over it. And I have some off-color jokes that I won't tell on the podcast about master bedrooms and primary bedrooms. But this particular property only has one large bedroom on the main and then multiple bedrooms in the lower level. And so would that appeal to people with younger children? Absolutely not. It's a non-starter. But would it appeal to people that have teenagers? Absolutely, because there's this magical moment when your kids are no longer as fun to be around, and it's called when they become teenagers usually.
And they don't want anything to do with you.
And they don't really want to hang out with you either, so putting them in the basement when they're teenagers is a really popular maneuver. So thinking about that, the specific type of buyer that is interested in this type of property is really important. A main level primary might appeal to somebody who is a little older. Maybe they're downsizing, they're concerned with future mobility issues, and that there's still enough storage in the lower level. That could be the right target. So how we craft the videography starts from understanding who is this buyer, how broad is this pool of buyers, right? So there's some properties that just have extreme appeal to a wide variety of potential buyers, and then there's some that are very narrow. So we'll talk about this a little bit more in our shameless actually we're not talking about this in our shameless self-promotion, so I'll just mention it now. I mentioned it in our last podcast. We're listing a mixed-use property that has pretty nice finishes, and the seller has even increased her investment in the bathroom finishes, and it looks really nice in the main level apartment. And it's not what you would see at anything close to CU that is Studentville, where there's high student density. Instead, the type of buyer that's likely going to be interested in this property is probably somebody that's a young professional, or somebody that wants, like, it's a grandparent flat, right? Like their grandkids are here in Boulder and they've been visiting frequently, but they sure would like their own space, and they want to visit for longer durations, maybe even move here. And so this particular property really appeals to that type of buyer because it's got nice restaurants nearby. It's going to have all that amazing museum stuff that's moving in. We'll be talking about that in a little bit. And it has great public transit, but it also has very low student density. So would we show the distance to campus in that video? Probably not, because it doesn't make any sense. But we will talk about the upcoming investment that the city is about to make in the Museum of Modern Art, or Contemporary Art, BMOCA.
Right. Yeah, how do you approach something where it's kind of like a property that's a very good catch-all, you know, maybe like a large ranch with bedrooms all on the main, well, that's what a ranch is, but, you know, so it fits kind of multiple different types of buyers. What's the play? Is it basically kind of hit on the very high notes and let the rest of it go, or how do you approach it?
Well, there are some key selling points that have broad-based appeal, right? Like access to open space, everyone wants to hear about.
Yeah.
And access to parks, everyone wants to hear about. And sometimes it depends on the quality of the interior. So some of these properties have very little in terms of updates, and they're very functional, but they're quite dated inside. So crafting our videography and our photography to feature dated interiors doesn't make a lot of sense.
Right.
So we're really doing our best to feature other highlights of the property, like maybe the investment they made in solar shingles or a power wall, or the location benefits of being really close to the retail and the quality of that retail and the quality of the open space. It tells a better story. So that's how we approach that. And we might want to point out things that they didn't know when they walked in the door with their agent who hasn't done their homework or hasn't been in the industry long, or maybe they're just, you know, the Redfin click a button, show a property person. They know nothing about this property, know nothing about their people that they're showing it to. They're just unlocking the door and hoping to collect a commission. What we want to do is feature things like the orientation of the house, the potential build out of a home with this orientation. All of that's really important because larger lots enable larger homes due to floor area ratio limitations here in the city of Boulder. The larger the lot, typically the larger the home you can build. And that's whether or not you as a buyer intend to do that, it's still a very important component of the property's value. And the other piece, Hamish, and this isn't so much about marketing, it's more about negotiation. It sort of reminds me of, you know, that kind of joke of sellers on Craigslist that reply, "No lowballs, I know what I got."
Yeah.
Right? Well, knowing what you have is actually really important.
Yeah.
And so for the basic ranch-style house, which we're going to go into a lot of detail on in this podcast, for every one of those, there's probably 10 potential buyers. Not just in the current market, but into the future. The depth of potential buyers is much greater versus a one-bedroom property, right? A one-bedroom property, like we listed one 2 years ago that was a two-bedroom, and we actually listed it as a three-bedroom, even though that third bedroom was clearly not a legal bedroom. And we disclosed it very carefully. This is not a third bedroom. It's an open loft. But in terms of the MLS data, we put it as a three-bedroom because if we had listed it as a two, we would have lost 90% of potential buyers who tell their agent, "I need at least a three-bedroom, two-bath."
Yeah.
And the search field would have, so you want to think about the technical side of how people search for real estate using the MLS. And you also want to think about the story your real estate marketing should be telling. And honestly, that's a story that is developed in cooperation and collaboration with the seller by talking to them about what are the best things you found about living here. Like, what were the things that people may not notice right away, but you realize after having lived here for a while. And we try to help build that in to the marketing plan for the property.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, lots of like kind of quality of life things and things that aren't immediately recognizable. Something too, I think, going forward when we're working with sellers is the due diligence docs. Some of them have really handy information that would be great, if we were listing the house to begin with. And so I wonder about getting kind of a little bit more of the documentation together as well and going through that and seeing if there's any selling points that would otherwise be missed.
That's a good point, and useful to get ahead of that early in the process. I'm having a flash to a contrasting approach, and it's in some ways it's contrasting. In some ways, I think it illustrates how to do it right, but also how to potentially stumble over yourself with unconscious imaging or unconscious messaging. So there's an agent in Denver. We won't mention their name because we criticize by category, not by name. But this agent has works for a brand brokerage, one of the larger ones, and has a significant presence in the Denver market and does a lot of videography. And they have partnered with a luxury car dealership, it appears, and they are putting these luxury cars into their videos. But the luxury car brand is Bentley, and Bentley is absolutely luxury. There's no argument. But is it really the messaging you want in your listing is to have an actor roll up, and sometimes it's the agent, but sometimes it's an actor, roll up in a Bentley, and there are these really sexy low shots of the Bentley, and then there's sort of follow-throughs of an attractive model walking in, and she's carrying shopping bags from luxury boutiques, and she rolls out her yoga mat, right? She rolls out her yoga mat. She's doing yoga. She's having her contemplative influencer moment with her tea. And then there's a drone shot leaving as she opens up the upper level master suite doors from the patio, overlooks the pool, and this amazing like scene. And some of the shots follow the actor a little too closely in ways that are, I think, a little gratuitous, right? Like, it's not a rap video with scantily clad talent. But it's still a little like, okay, this model is like, what you're showing is more of the model's body than the house at all. Like, it's truly it's a sexy car. It's a very sexy actor. It's a very sexy scene. But the subconscious messaging, I find a little bit disturbing, and it's not our clientele, so I'm
distorted, okay, right?
Well, a little distorted, maybe a little aspirational for people that think that that's what most luxury home buyers are like. And in our experience, our clients, the vast majority of them work for a living and have been very successful at what they do, and they're not ostentatious about their wealth. In fact, they're the opposite. Mm-hmm. The more wealthy they are, the more likely they're driving a Toyota Corolla or a Toyota Highlander. It might be a brand new one or one that's 2 years old, but they're less likely to be driving this Look at Me brand.
Yeah. No, 100%.
And so it screams, I don't really know my clientele. And maybe I only know this because I used to live and work on Nantucket, where there's many billionaires, and everyone buying
it's just who they were,
is a millionaire, and the ones that are actually not affluent but want you to think they are the ones that focus on things like fancy watches and the car, and the ones that are actually really wealthy tend to not want to stand out. They dress more conservatively or in completely whimsical ways because they're not trying to impress you. They're just enjoying their lives.
But it's that like old money versus new money thing, right? You know, like new money wants you to know, and old money doesn't care if you know.
Maybe that's a good rule of thumb. But it's really important to think about the subconscious imaging in our videography as well as our still photography, in the marketing language, because buyers in Boulder are really smart people. They tend to be engineers and doctors. They tend to be entrepreneurs. They're extremely well educated. And for everyone that's into Flash, there's probably 90 that, they would prefer a Volvo to a Bentley.
A sports car or something, yeah.
And they might own a sports car, but it's not their daily, and they're not ostentatiously splashing it across Instagram. Like, they're enjoying the community that, like, Ferrari has a really powerful community of people, and so does Porsche. They tour together. People are into older ones. It's classy. It's not a Bentley, low cut angle rap music with a sexy model that rolls out of it. It's just a little strange. And so I think that it's really important to know who your buyers are. And the buyers for true luxury are less likely to be into ostentatious displays. They're more likely to be subtle.
I wonder if that sells to like football players, if that's like the target demographic of that. Because that's like the only thing that I can see, the people with the funds, and then the kind of that's the way they like to live. But they're notoriously bad with their money, right? Like, so that's a known thing. Football players in particular, basketball players too, have a short professional career, and they have to make a lot of money and then have it last. And so often it's not uncommon that they blow through it way early. And so most professional sports teams will connect the athlete with investment advisors to try to keep them from hurting themselves. So that's I hear you though. That's the but how many football? Like, right. But for every luxury home, like Boulder is dotted with luxury homes, right? There's in the $3+ million category, there's probably
50 or 60 on the market right now, and I'm just throwing, maybe there's a lot more. I am not looking at the MLS, but of those, how many are professional sports players with bad financial acumen?
No, so even if it was, right, I'm just like, we don't play with the cheesy kind of ads, right? And I don't think that's our preferred clientele, so we avoid it, and it makes sense to avoid it. From our standpoint.
We want to. It's better to focus on what we want to appeal to, and I think what we're doing our best to appeal to are the intelligent buyer, the well-educated buyer that values craftsmanship, that values quality, that values the location, and would prefer to not have the fanciness, right? And so for the 14-year-old me, right, would be all about the Bentley. And or the Ferrari rolling in, right? Because that's what I thought was cool when I was 14. But the mature me, that now frequently we have affluent clients, I've got a lot more respect for them than the sort of garish cartoon version of affluence. The Scrooge McDuck version of affluence is another kind of story type, archetype, and the football player. These are not real. They're unlikely to be the buyer. They're much more likely to be an entrepreneur. Sometimes it's somebody who has inherited generational wealth. They're much more likely to be a professional, and they're very likely to be extremely well educated. And so let's appeal to what would be sensible and still very elegant and attractive, and would hit on deal points or real estate points that would resonate with them.
Values, right?
Well, capital preservation, for example, is something that people that have earned it care about. Yeah. And choosing North Boulder, where there's a higher density of high-end homes, luxury homes that are north of 3, would appeal to somebody that cares about capital preservation, because there's a lot more density of high-end homes there. Versus South Boulder, it's like an order of 1 to 5, maybe, right? Like 20% of the high-end homes are sold in South Boulder, and it might be a better choice for you as the house, but it's also a good data point that that there's less density of homes like yours, and you may be, your home itself might be an outlier, and you may feel like an outlier among the others in the neighborhood, the unwashed people that can only afford a $1.5 to $2 million house. You might feel uncomfortable with those people, or maybe you don't care. And I personally don't care. That's not how I judge humans, is how fat their wallet is. But from a real estate investment perspective, it's relevant. And maybe for certain people, it's relevant. I did have a client many years ago, and I remember their names. Sometimes I forget people's names. These people I remember because of what they said. And what they said was, Osman, we're looking for a neighborhood with people like us to buy.
I remember you told this story.
And I knew what they meant. And they definitely knew what they meant. And yet I'm like, well, we have to be careful with this, because I don't resent you for wanting that. Most people want to live with people like them. Although I personally think diversity has incredible value. But we ended up finding them a house in a golf course neighborhood. They were in their 60s.
Easy peasy.
Retired. They didn't even play golf. I'm like, you know what you need is a golf course neighborhood, and we'll find you one.
We've got those in Colorado. You best believe, yeah.
We did, and they're very happy with that. I interpreted it as golf course neighborhood.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on from archetypes. So there, I guess the final thought on this, and I'd like you to throw in your final thought, Hamish, as well, because I clearly do too much talking. But my final thought on this is that it's important to consciously develop the story. It's important to consider the buyer archetypes, the customer archetypes for what you're selling. It's really important to analyze the competition, of course. But as you market the home, as you develop that marketing plan, do it consciously and do your best to avoid subconscious imaging and messaging that tells a story that might actually turn off your potential audience. And we have those conversations, and if you're a client, we're certainly happy to invite you into the story room, right? The writer's workshop, when we talk about what we're developing for your listing, so that you can help us influence it in a way that's positive and increases the likelihood of selling. And knowing what you got, if you get a low offer and you know that there's 100 buyers waiting for this house in 3 months, you might want to hold off on that low ball. It's probably the smart move.
Yeah. No, we've had sellers, say that they've chosen us because they believe that we will properly communicate the points and the values of the home to the correct buyers, or in a way that, the correct buyer archetype can hear, right? In a way that they'll properly understand. And that's a really nice compliment. And also, it's we talk a lot about mastery, and I think just as everything continues to evolve, we're always going to be pushing for it. We're not going to say, oh yeah, we've got it, we're done. But it's nice to hear that progress, and then also visit this topic and think about it and talk about it further, right? Keep it fresh and top of mind.
Well, we need to, as they say in the woo-woo land of Boulder, we need to speak into their listening.
There we go.
And as they're listening, as time changes, attention spans likely continue to shorten. We need to continue to adjust our marketing to speak into their listening. And then in some ways, I kind of wonder, given how popular podcasts have become, that people are sick of short form journalism, sick of short form attention span depleting content. And they actually want things like this podcast, where we are going in depth on the topic, and we're not time limited in any realistic sense. Like, we're going to talk about it till we feel like we've reached completion on the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Which today we do have meetings, so
which we just did. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next segment. All right, so let's jump into market conditions. And in this case, we're going to dive deep into a neighborhood in South Boulder called Table Mesa. And not just in the neighborhood itself, because there are several sub-neighborhoods in greater Table Mesa, but also specific property types and how they sold over the last 12 months. So we prepared this actually for a client this week who was considering an offer on a property, and in fact made an offer on a property. We have not contracted yet, but I think we're on the edge of that. We've reached verbal agreement. But as part of that, because of the limited amount of time, we have not been looking at homes with this buyer for months. We've been looking at homes, well, for a couple of months, but not enough time to really get a sense of where value lies. It made more sense to we usually do this. I call this going into the war room. So when a client says, Osman, I want this house, let's write an offer, we offer this opportunity to sit down together and look at the comps. And we dump it into a spreadsheet in addition to looking at the photos and the neighborhood, the qualitative factors, like where in the neighborhood is it? Is it not a busy location? The comps, I mean. Where are these comps located relative to the house we're considering? And making some value adjustments. What sort of updates are in this house? And what sort of investments might you have to make in the future to make this home livable? And what's the likelihood of another similar home popping up on the market in the next few months? That's the analysis that we went down this week for a client. And they were looking, I'm not going to reveal the address of the target property, but there are two similar homes on the market right now in Table Mesa. These are single story, they are one-story ranches with a basement.
With a basement, okay.
Right. So that's a key distinction, because the basement adds a lot of value. You can also segue this. You could also drill down to garage spaces, because some of these homes have 2-car garages and some of them have 1. And most of these homes have 3 or 4 bedrooms, but a couple of them have 5. And all of them, though, are that one-story ranch with a basement. And they're all within an approximate square footage range, which hovers around 2,000. And plus or minus 2,000 can vary if they've done additions. Most of these are shaped like a brick. Some of them are L-shaped. So most of them are like a rectangle on top of a rectangle. Many years ago, I did something called the Martin Acres Index, which looked exactly at this style of house without a basement, because that's the most basic house style in Boulder. Usually those are 3-bedroom, 1-baths without a basement, and they have a 1-car garage. These are single-story ranches with a basement and have to have a garage. And during the last 12 months, there were 18 of these that sold. And the price range for these homes were anywhere from high 9s, mid to high 9s, all the way up to 1.6, which is sort of an astounding number when you think about that as a range. But diving in deeper, you quickly realize that is largely affected by updates and sometimes the desperation of the buyer when they pay more than list. So a number of these sold for discounts. The median negotiated discount was 1.5%. But there were, in that data set, there were several that went above list, several that sold for full list. One went as high as 11% over list, which indicates either intentional underpricing as a strategy or a buyer that just had to have it for their own reasons and was willing to pay a significant premium. They maybe had more data on what the valuation should be and felt comfortable. Sometimes the depth of someone's pocketbook determines how much they're willing to pay too, so that's something to keep in mind. But when in the overall negotiated median discount, it could have been a premium, but in this case was median discount was 1.5% below list. One of the things I could do if I really wanted to analyze this further, Hamish, and I didn't do this last night, and I'm now thinking about it, is that we probably should have just only looked at the median discount when there was a discount. Because the way that these markets, the way that real estate really works is that if it's brand new on market and it's highly desirable and priced right, it should sell for list or more. That's been what's happening for the last decade in Boulder. And if it's been on the market for a couple of months or even a couple of weeks, it's going to sell at a discount. And what's that discount? Because you have to first do this, slice it into the right category.
Right.
And then you do the discount, but we didn't do that last night. The median for the whole data set was 1.5% below list, and so that's a median price of 1.195, or about $537 a square foot. And we use that info to help guide our client in what they offered. But the way to really think about these things, if you're a buyer, is that this data set, 18, is actually quite a lot. Right? In the course of a year, that's more than one a month if you spread it out over the whole year. Yeah. So you know that every month you might get a shot at another house that might be worth buying. But if you were to then separate this data set into homes that are updated and not updated, what does that break out to? And then if we did one more, of the ones that are updated, which ones are cheap flips with poor quality but high, visually it looks pretty, but when you get close, it's like that car with the orange peel paint. It's called like a 10-foot paint job.
Actually, today gorgeous. I saw a good one. It's a 20/20 paint job. Good at 20 feet or 20 miles an hour.
Right. There you go.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Like at the moment you get close, you notice all these imperfections. I mean, I've been in listings where the flipper is still working on the property, even though it's on the market, and there's junk everywhere. And
we saw one where the door trim was not painted and super rough to the touch, and there was still drywall dust on places.
So now, not only when I've been in those situations when the workers are still in the house and they're sort of putting their stuff in the garage and working on it at night or whatever's happening to try to look, the seller in a flip, the seller is under intense pressure to get it sold fast, right? Every day costs them money.
Profit
because
motivated.
They're usually carrying a loan of some kind. They're very profit motivated, but they're also sometimes really foolish. And working on a house while it's marketed is usually pretty foolish because now, not only am I looking at, I know it's a flip. I knew it was a flip probably within 30 seconds of walking in the door, but we're also looking at how the workers are handling themselves. I'm looking at how they're organizing their tools. I'm looking at their sloppiness, like where they're storing stuff. I know it sounds crazy, but you've been in the car shop where the shop is really well organized and clean, and that says something. Like, how can you work and do high quality work in a shop that is chaos?
Well, if it's all clean, maybe they just don't get enough work.
Oh.
I come from a dirty shop.
Do you really think that you're dirty? Your garage. I got to see your garage. I'm getting a feeling your garage is a disaster.
It's rough, yeah.
My shop goes through, because it's also our gym, goes through cycles. So sometimes I don't put everything away, and then I wait till I'm working out, and then I put things away between sets. I clean up the shop between the resting period for sets. But a really messy shop, it's like a messy house. It just reaches this point of, I just can't stand it anymore, and I gotta clean this up.
Yeah. No, and I'm in a very long cycle of disorganization, but that is subject to change.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're not disorganized in your workflow, but it sounds like there's some disorganization to work on at home.
Dude.
But let's stay with this real estate topic, this market. So 18 sold ranches with full basements in Table Mesa in the last 12 months. Median sale price of 1.195. Median negotiation discount of 1.5% below list. Dollar per square was $5.37, and all of those are useful benchmarks to know. Like, those are good rules of thumb. Maybe it'll feel better if you get a price lower than 1.195, but you really should be looking very specifically at the homes that are updated, because in this data set of 18, probably half of them have not been touched in a decade or longer, and some of them may have other issues, and we'll talk about that in our Sales of the Week segment, because one of them made it that likely has issues and also maybe cause someone to steal the house. So there's data outliers, right? The people that paid 11% more than list, you probably want to throw that out. And you probably want to throw out the lowest one, the people that paid a 10% discount to list. And in the middle of those, that median was 1.5. So all of that's useful info, but really the relevant info is if you know you need a turnkey house that's not a cheap flip, well, of those 18, there might be 4 in there that were quality work done by the homeowner for themselves, not as a cheap flip. Might still have some issues that show up on inspection, but you're not going to be dealing with like trim falling off the walls and like paint that's too thin and things that are like done wrong and without a permit because
that
it was
remind
cheap.
you constantly. Yeah.
That remind you
Every
constantly.
morning you wake up and see the trim falling off.
And you see the window that's slightly, the door that's hung wrong, the finish work is just not quite right and is breaking. Like tile work that was so cheap they didn't level it, they just slapped it down on the floor and it's breaking up. So all sorts of things show up, and it's not the wrong move to choose a cheaper flooring product when it appeals to the mass market and it's still a decent quality, but it's the wrong move to choose the cheapest possible labor you can find and the cheapest possible finish choices that still fit the current look. Because it will look really bad in a few years, and I guarantee you will be likely regretting buying the cheap flip.
I was looking before, while you were introducing this segment, because a while ago now, we found an old newspaper clipping announcing the development of Table Mesa, and it had 4 different housing types of the development, and I was like, well, can we name these ranches? And it's the Katrina is the popular 3-bedroom ranch-style home with a full basement, patio, and all built-in appliances, carpeting, and partially dropped. So I wonder if this is the Katrina index, but...
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I prefer to call it the Martin Acres Index, and I will update it at some point. What basically happened with my index was that there were so few sales. Like, sales dropped off a cliff starting in 2006. They started continually dropping the volume. Not that homes weren't selling, just available homes disappeared. And so when you have like one house a year that fits the index, it's sort of not very exciting to update it. But maybe you could even Google this. You might even still find it if you were to search for Martin Acres Index. You might find an example of what we were doing.
Should I include the link in the show notes?
No, people can Google it themselves if they want.
Okay.
Because if I had just spent a week updating this thing, or a couple of hours,
best believe that's everywhere we can post it.
Yeah. I don't want to link to something that isn't updated. It's going to be at least a few years old. But I think maybe we should include this little spreadsheet, Hamish, because it does break out the data in an interesting way, and you can see exactly what streets these homes are on. You can see the MLS numbers. I don't think that's violating any particular rule for the real estate commission or the MLS. These are sold comps. We will remove the property address of the one
change
we targeted,
the name of it.
because that's still active and hopefully goes under contract today. But even so, it won't have closed by the time this podcast is live. But it was useful data. I think it helped our client feel confident, because originally we started with a much lower offer, and that's a whole nother topic. Really, when you write that first offer, you want to write an offer that gets a counter, not so low that they just tell you to take a hike. And we did hit that, but it was still so low that clearly the seller signaled back they're not desperate. But we still ended up with a pretty decent discount that was close to, a little better than 2%. So we beat the median. Let me see, what did we end up at?
And I'll wash it too, and remove anything identifying out of it.
Yeah, we ended up at 3% below list. So we doubled the median.
Nice.
So I feel pretty good about that. I mean, I don't know how our client feels, but
I like that we're obscuring the address and stuff. Hopefully the listing agent doesn't check into this on Friday.
She can listen to it. I think she would agree, and the seller can too. I think that, and I don't think we've compromised our client in any way, even if people guess the address, because one, the contract is the contract, and two, I feel pretty like we did pretty good for a home. The biggest problem is finding a home worth buying. Finding a home worth buying and getting better, double the median negotiated discount, I feel pretty darn good about. Of course, that does include all the. I guess it would only be. Well, let's forget it. Let's just take our accolade and let it
take
go.
Our win.
That's the bottom, I think, on where the seller was going to land, because they got very granular on small numbers at the end, and it was just a silly thing at the end. But our client hopefully is under contract by the time this podcast is live, and if not, then others can take advantage of our low offer as an anchor point in their negotiation.
Perfect. I think that's got to be it. We need to kind of move along here, but one of the things that you mentioned, right, is like the frequency of that same property type coming up, and we've discussed that in a very early pod of ours, opportunity cost. And it's something that came up with a client around that same time, and he brought it up. We were on the phone, and he was talking about opportunity cost in the house that he ended up closing on. And that's just kind of, I've been thinking about that for a lot. And if you are a prospective buyer, maybe go check out that podcast as well, Opportunity Cost. It's a really good one just as far as like gearing up. You know, will another house come along? You know, how aggressive do you really need to be on this one? I'll link that in the description too.
Yep, absolutely. That helps guide in terms of structuring your offer and your aggressiveness. Also, your level of patience, right? Like, how much more time do you have to shop? How much more of your life are you willing to wait for hoping a better house shows up?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's always another house from my perspective, but there may not be another house that's the same location, the same features, the same build quality, and that fits your timeline. And so if you want to pay, how much is that worth to you to have it be done?
We can't tell you that one.
Right. Versus, do you want to buy a lot and spend 2.5 years building your dream house? Or do you want to buy a house that's pretty close to your dream house now and focus on other matters? Because building a house is going to consume a lot of your attention over 2.5 years, while you're living in a home that's not your dream home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Shall we be shameless?
Let's be shameless. Hamish, your mic is a little echoey. I think it's because it's too far from your mouth. Yeah.
Is this a little better?
Yeah, that's cool. Better. I think you need to bring it a little closer.
Yeah.
Okay. Shameless self-promotion.
If the person that I Facebook Marketplace messaged is listening to this podcast, please respond, and I'll have a new microphone from you. I know you read the message. All right.
You could just, I mean, Hamish, microphones are not that expensive. We could just buy a new deal. Microphone. Okay, I love a deal. You know I'm a sucker for a deal. All right, Charles. Charles is a client of ours. I think that name is generic enough that we can say his first name. And we've known him for many years, and he is in the hunt for property. And in particular is looking for a ranch, probably bigger than 2,000 square feet. Because every time we see something that's around 2,000, it's too small. So I would say 2,500 minimum square footage on the main. Could be as big as, let's say, 3,500 square feet of living space. And needs some adequate storage. Doesn't have to have a basement, but 2,500 with, like, let's say, a 2,000 square foot basement or a 1,500 square foot basement would be perfect. And a 2-car garage attached or detached. And an HOA, non-HOA neighborhood would be preferred, but would consider an HOA neighborhood if it's the right property, and is not interested in doing a ton of work, but might do some light touches on the house, which we've agreed to partner with him on. We don't normally do that, although I feel like I'm doing that right now with one of our listings. But we will help you if we can, to help you with connections to contractors to get the home that you really want, get the updates that you really want. So if you are a seller listening to this, or a real estate agent that is working with a seller that has this type of property, then reach out to us. Fraser Meadows has been kind of our target zone. We're not looking for anything that's in the flood zone, probably not even the 500-year flood, preferably not in any flood risk, and enough square footage on the main, decent-sized primary bedroom, and high-quality updates. They don't have to be brand-new updates, and he's more than willing to pay fair market for the right property. We've been looking for a while and striking out. So if you are listening to this and have that property in your pocket, reach out to us. We'll make it worth your while.
Nice. I think
that
you
sounds
nailed
awfully
everything Charles need. Yeah.
That sounds like I'm handing somebody a bag of cash in the men's room. When I say make it worth your while, I mean the deal will work in your favor and everything will be up above table on the board.
The house you wanted to sell may sell.
And sell with minimal hassle, with somebody who has integrity and communicates clearly and doesn't play games. Neither do we in how we approach real estate. So that's one of the biggest advantages to working with our clients, is that we keep them behaving well. And if they behave badly, we fire them, because life is too short and this town is too small to deal with people that are unethical and have no integrity.
That's the truth.
So there you go. That's my promise to you. And if you need another sweetener, I'll take you out to dinner. I don't know, after closing.
Oh man, I don't know if you can you say that?
I could take them out after closing. If it didn't influence the deal, having a closing dinner with the other side. That's how. I mean, bankers in Wall Street have
especially bad negotiations, that's a thing too.
Well, if
we need to
the
go
others,
have dinner and unpack.
If the other side or our client behaved badly, we offer that as a condolences after closing. Like after the dust is settled, it's time to kiss and make up. We're so sorry our client was that bad, but that's super rare, Hamish. That's like once every 5 years. We have a client that we will do what you want us to do. You're the decider. We advise, but sometimes what you want to do feels a little gross. Like we want to shower now. We don't like taking advantage of elderly and orphans. We don't like it just doesn't feel good. Like
not that we have either. Full disclosure, no orphans or elderly have been taken advantage of.
I mean. At the same time, if it's the fourth quarter and it's an estate sale and it's been on the market 9 months and the family has owned this property for 40 years and their adult children that are my age are inheriting, $1 million each, I don't mind hammering the heck out of those people with a low offer and trying my best to get you a good deal. And I mean, I frame it as representing our client really well and negotiating to the best of our ability. And if they don't get as big of a yacht because, we took away $50,000 from each of the siblings or something, I'm okay with that.
Yeah. No, that's super.
Yeah.
Alrighty.
Okay. But if it's something like something tragic involved, I may not. I've got a heart. I'm not going to take advantage of people that are dealing with a personal tragedy of some kind. It just isn't right.
Right.
So find a different agent if you want to chase those. If you want to ambulance chase real estate deals, go find a different agent. We're not the right team for you. Okay, other shameless self-promotion item. Well, we took a look at the competition this week up in Shanahan Ridge and saw how we are positioned against the other listings. There's two others that are priced exactly as our listing is, 3707. And I think we are priced right, given what the competition is. The other one had a slightly better view, priced the same, and the other one had much more square footage, priced the same. So I guess you could argue that there's some room there. But those listings, I think, are about to disappear. And ours is not a cheap flip, and the high-quality work is very visible and obvious when you tour this property. And make sure you value in the cooling system that was put in, because these Shanahan Ridge condos were built in the 70s with poor insulation and baseboard electric heat. So when you see something when you see a seller that's invested in energy efficient heating or cooling, know that that's money that's going to pay you back. So check out our listing at 3707 Shanahan Ridge. I think 3707 Telluride Circle. I think it's the only one in the market right now. I guess I could check really quick. But that messes up my window. So you can check, Hamish. But I'm pretty sure that's the only one that's currently available up in Shanahan Ridge. It's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and it's a really delightful property. waiting for the right buyer.
No.
So this segment is our sales of the week. Hamish is about to start a timer for 2.5 minutes per listing.
Oh, let me pull that up.
You ready to go?
In 2 seconds. Okay, ready?
Okay, and you can hold up the timer if I go over. Starting now. First one is 2035 Glenwood Drive. This property closed on October 25th for 2.3. It had been listed for just under 2.4, available for slightly over a week before a buyer locked it down with that 100,000 off, or should we say 97,000 off. From a location perspective, if you've ever run the Boulder, you know exactly where this is. It's right across the street from Columbine Park on the north side of the street, facing south, and it'll be a lot of fun to have a party there during the Boulder, and I'm sure all of the neighbors will be. This is the kind of place where you see people throwing out marshmallows or bacon during the run. The house itself is relatively small at 2,800 square feet, built in 2016, contemporary style, and pretty nicely updated, if I have to say so. I think it looks, maybe it's not updated since it was built in 2016, but I think it encapsulates a very modern aesthetic that a lot of people are looking for in not buying their parents' house. They want to buy something that looks like it was built this century, and it has a really nice upper level deck off the primary. Great indoor and outdoor. One of the things, and you'll see this really clearly shown in the listing photos, Hamish, we tell our clients when they're designing houses or remodeling houses that people love to open the front door and be able to look right through the house to the backyard. And that's what this house definitely does. Of course, the aerials show you the park nearby. So from a deal perspective, you're looking at $816 a square foot on a pretty typical size lot on a smaller than typical house. Not tiny, but slightly smaller than typical. It's just under that 3,000 square foot magic mark. And as you know from last week, that price range is really well balanced between buyers and sellers. The 2 to 3 million range. It is relatively a balanced market. And it closed, on October 25th. So I think this is a pretty solid deal. It was a cash deal, which probably helped the buyer lock down that $97,000 discount.
Nice. Under 2 minutes.
Excellent. What time?
My thoughts. Yeah, you got it in about 2 minutes and 2 seconds,
all right.
Roughly.
Your thoughts. Should I start a timer?
Yeah. No, I was just easy comments. Being across from that park, right, is almost like a little bit of a protected view and gives you some open space out the front door. And then one of my, I think probably both of ours, positives for it is that oversized driveway. That's a good look. Yeah.
Well, you could even argue they got a deal. I wasn't really thinking about the view. And the view, as a rule of thumb, is 10% for a protected view corridor. And what are the odds that the city of Boulder is going to decide to put a building in this park? It's not zero. We know how the city is rolling. But it's certainly unlikely because of how much the community uses this park.
I could see some uproar if Boulder started getting rid of parks.
For sure. There's uproar even without getting rid of full parks. But what I think is also what adds to the unlikelihood of further development or of a homeless encampment is the fact that Columbine Elementary is directly south of there. So if there's something that gets people riled up, it's camping homeless people in a park directly next to the elementary school.
Next to a school.
That's not wise for anyone to try, and unlikely to be successful as a long-term spot. Also, there's no real retail nearby, so when you think about the risk of your neighborhood turning into a homeless park or a homeless encampment, the proximity of retail is a real key component of that. That's why you see so much of it downtown. Also, access to water, which is also why the creek path is so popular.
Yeah, it makes sense. Okay.
All right, let's move on to the next one.
Yes.
3055 25th Street. This property is a single-story ranch. Actually would fit the criteria of the Martin Acres Index that we've been talking about. And then they added an ADU to it, which bumped the square footage to 1,500. And this property was listed for $1,250,000 on the market for a little over a week before a buyer locked it down. It closed at $1,225,000, and I don't know if there are additional concessions. It looks like a small amount of concession of closing costs. Oh, I'm going to sneeze.
Bless you.
Excuse me. So it's a pretty solid play. So this type of house really appeals to a broad variety of buyers. In Martin Acres, you see them for roughly $800,000, and you can add another 10% premium to go from Martin Acres to the North Boulder location. They describe the subdivision as Green Meadows. Nobody calls this location Green Meadows. It's kind of north central Boulder. It's west of US 36, or also known as 28th Street. It's just north of Edgewood. It happens to be in a location that sometimes has really crappy cell phone signal, but hopefully they fix that. There's quite a few ranches like it in this neighborhood. I think it's a solid spot, really close to the Google campus, really close to Whole Foods, very bikeable. So add that 10% premium to the 800-ish for the same house in Martin Acres. Let's bump it up a little more if the finishes were nice, and the landscaping is really nice. So I think that's an easy add 10% or more. So let's bring it up to 900. And then what's the value of the ADU? $325 for the ADU all day long. Like, you're not going to be able to build that for $325. And I think the finish quality is actually more than 100 premium, maybe 150 premium. This looks like a really good deal, actually. And the thing I don't like, and I'll be quite frank about that, is it's just there's a incoherence or a incongruity between the 50s era house and the square box, flattish roof ADU. And it just looks kind of like, what's that weird box on the left side of your house? Maybe there's things that the owner could do to try to match the two houses a little closer, the two structures. But maybe that's also something you just grow to love, that they're kind of quirky looking. And previous owner apparently was, it's described as owned by one of Boulder's renowned artists. Oh, I'm going over. All right, don't go there. Fine, Hamish, we'll stop talking about it. Read the listing description if you want to see all the ways it's marketed. I think this was well done, a pretty solid deal. I don't think they grossly overpaid, and it was available only for 12 days in the fourth quarter. So, one thing it's worth noting is it didn't sell to the first buyer. It actually, during the first week, somebody locked it down and then bailed out, and then the second buyer jumped in and closed it. So that's something else to be aware of. Backup offers are a thing, and you should always do one if you are serious about a house. So congrats to that buyer for a solid play.
Yeah, I agree with you on the incongruence between the architecture on this one, and that ADU reminds me a lot of this Top Gear episode where Jeremy Clarkson and the gang built campers, but completely DIY campers, and Clarkson built this massively grotesque kind of modern pillar that was being towed on a trailer, and it was it was like falling apart and super flimsy, but it looks really similar. And on a due diligence standpoint, make sure permitting is good on this one, and then also because it is kind of like in the ground. I've seen high radon on above grade, but that ADU being in the ground too, I'd want to check on radon, and make sure. One thing you said, Oz, that I didn't know as well. So ADUs contribute to the total finished square foot of the listing.
Yep.
Yeah, that's news to me. That's cool to know.
You didn't know that? It should be. So the MLS doesn't let you break out separate buildings. So
yeah,
the best practice, and something this agent, I believe, did, is you just add the square footage to the main building, and then you disclose it in the broker remarks or in the public remarks. The square footages shown are cumulative of the two structures.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Let's move on.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Go.
Okay, go. 219 South 2nd Avenue in Superior closed on October 24th. It's a brand new house built in 2023. I guess not quite brand new, but close enough. And relatively small, only 2,200 square feet, 4-bedroom, 3-bath, 2-story. Traditional in how it looks on the outside, but if you look at the inside photos, it's pretty attractive in terms of its layout, in terms of the taller ceilings, in terms of the finishes, but it's also classic. This is I mean, if you squint, you can see all of the historic lines that are just sort of larger than you would see in a true historic home. And this home is a Marshall Fire rebuild. So we're coming up on the 2-year anniversary of the Marshall Fire. It destroyed over 1,000 homes in a wind-driven wildfire in December 2021. And many of those homes were rebuilt, and some of those are now coming on market. This is one. It was available for only a couple of days, so maybe only 24 hours. So just so everyone knows, the MLS allows you 3 business days up here to change the status. So when you see days to offer, it's quite possible that it's not accurate and it actually went under contract within 24 or 48 hours. But you might have had a shot at it if you were on the ball and had a responsive agent that could get you in to see it rather quickly. And it's sold for full list, and it's sold with a conventional fixed rate mortgage, so it was not a cash deal, but there were no additional concessions. We know the listing agent, he's high quality, does good work. We've seen his listings before. Also a member of the Hearth and Stone community, and that's Barry Remington's listing. 530 is square, bigger than typical lot for this type of location. Superior is a location, from you think about geography, from a township perspective, doesn't really have its own historic downtown. Has something they're trying to create, like an artificial fake downtown. I don't know what to call it, but it's really close to Costco. It's very close to the Marshall Mesa open space. And if you really want to come into Boulder, it's a really fast drive or bike ride on the bikeway, or commute to Denver or to the airport. It sort of fits the budget kind of house. Like this same house in Table Mesa would have been probably just under $2 million.
Yeah, I sleuthed, right? I'm looking on Street View and back to the listing, and for a moment I thought that sunroom on the listing was added in after the build, but it's just on the back end there. One thing too that I want to kind of bring up, and you made it on time, Alice. A lot of new builds that I'm seeing in the Marshall Fire kind of rebuild, and just in general, they're huge homes on a pretty typical lot or a smaller lot, and so they're massive. They're very butted up against each other. This one seems to be kind of a nice, in proportion to the size of the lot, kind of a nice size footprint. And it's not looking at the houses, the house next to it on satellite view, it's also kind of offset slightly. So you're not right up looking completely next door, which I appreciate. It's nice to see a little bit more kind of room between new builds.
That's a good point. The lot size is 7,300 square feet. That's a little more generous than you see in new construction, probably because the neighborhood was platted in the 19 whatever, like quite a while ago. I think we saw sales history in the 80s. Hang on, when I go look at the public record. Well, I'm not entirely sure when it was originally platted, but the older the neighborhood, the more likely you're going to see a generous lot. And 7,300 square feet is more typical of what you would see in, say, South Boulder, not in new build in Superior. So that gives you that sense of space. And 2,200 square feet is, rather modest compared to...
It is.
What really you expect to see these days.
Yeah.
The one thing that's interesting is there is a stream behind it. So it's good to mention that Boulder is the most flood-prone city in Colorado. This is Superior, but we're not far off of Boulder. So when you're looking at a home that has a water feature, is in the flood zone, you may want to think about that as it impacts your insurability, as well as what would happen if that creek overran its banks. This particular house is in the 500-year flood, but the flood zones are not just determined by engineering studies. There's political influences, and some of our scientist clients have warned us that even the 500-year flood is likely going to see a lot more water activity and risk due to climate change, and you should really just be careful. And you may not want to buy in the 500-year flood for that reason alone. Or worse, the 100, which requires flood insurance and has limitations to permits, or the conveyance zones especially. So be careful
Yeah.
out there. But this house looks like a pretty good buy if that's what you were looking for. And I could totally see the type of buyer that doesn't want to pay Boulder prices and wants a much nicer quality home, but still in close proximity to the foothills, open space, trails. And if they want to, they can drive into Boulder for dinner.
Yeah. Final thing, they did in fact add a sunroom off the back. And that's enough. That's me.
You found that on the permit? What was that?
Street view. I just looked in a different angle.
Okay. So sunrooms, Hamish, don't typically have heat sources and technically shouldn't be part of the square footage. But sometimes you see sunrooms with heat sources and they may be part of the square footage. I think that little enclosure looks pretty nice back there.
Me too. I love the wood roof.
Yeah. Well, I don't think... oh, you mean the wood paneled ceiling. Yeah. Okay. Not the standing seam metal roof that is fire resistant.
Yes. But that is, added on from that. But yes, I thought it was neat.
Yeah, the sunroom is neat. Not clear it has a heat source. Not clear if it should be in the square footage or not. Something to think about when you're buying, whether or not it's legit square footage or not.
Yeah, that's good due diligence.
All right, let's move on.
Ready?
I'm ready, and you could show me the timer as well. Oh, you already started it.
Okay.
All right, start it again. 1135 Berea Drive is our fourth sale of the week. It closed October 24th. Berea Drive is a street that we have two clients on, actually, that come to mind immediately. We might have three. And neither of the two that I think of right off the top of my head have ever had any inclination of selling because it's such a great neighborhood and such a great little corner. During COVID, they had lots of outdoor parties to help build community. There's families there. The house sizes are typically pretty small, like this one is. The ones that haven't been modified or added to. This one's only 1,053 square feet, has a one-car attached garage, a two-bedroom, two-bath, so very likely it started off life as a three-bedroom, one-bath, which would have qualified it for the Martin Acres Index had it been in Martin Acres. And they almost certainly converted one of those bedrooms and added it to the primary and then added a second bathroom, a powder room, and a primary bathroom for... I keep trying to call it master, but I'm not going to call it master.
You've done really well.
I'm doing my best
to
be, to not be offensive. It's hard sometimes, Hamish. It's really hard.
You're doing great.
So house was built in 1962. If you look at the photos in this listing, you'll see lots of nice updates. Of course, that cool yellow door that would have matched our signage really nicely. So I don't know what they were thinking because that house is set up for our listing sign. The interior color choices, this gray drab thing is super Home Depot, not Home Depot. There's there are all those shows with home improvements, like House Flipper Gray is what people call it. It's sort of going out of style right now, but that's easy enough to change if you really want to change that color to something a little more vibrant. The concrete patio that's covered in the back with mature trees is really nice. The bathroom looks like right out of IKEA, which is okay. IKEA is super high quality. Nothing wrong with it, and it's turnkey. Small is beautiful, but it still took a while to sell. So this property hit the market in July. They originally listed it at $970, and then about a month later they cut it $20,000. Nothing happened. They waited another month and cut it. It looks like $15,000, and at that point, about a week later, a buyer snapped it up and agreed to pay the full, $100 over list, which was probably just symbolic. I suspect there might have been a risk of another buyer at that moment, and they decided to throw in $100 so that the seller could symbolically say they got more than list. But then they also threw in $12,400 in unknown concessions, almost certainly inspection related. When you see a number like that, like maybe the sewer line was bad or maybe the roof was toast. Unclear why they got that $12,400 in concession, but cool house and a pretty solid deal. Also, a house that won't work for some buyers because now it only has two bedrooms. It has a primary and an office. So remember the buyer archetype conversation. Who does this appeal to? It definitely doesn't appeal to like a family with two kids and two adults that need to work from home. Like, how's that going to work? But it might appeal to somebody that's a single young professional, or it might appeal to people that are done with their working career and want a simple small house small downsized house that is walking distance to Veely Lake and walking distance to the South Boulder shopping plaza with Southern Sun and all those goodies. So pretty solid play and a good benchmark. And Hamish, I see it 3 minutes 50, way over, but hopefully it was value add for those that were listening. Your thoughts, Hamish?
Only comment is picture 17. The shower is wet, and I have no idea why.
Really?
Yeah, the shower is wet.
Shower.
Yeah.
Oh, you're right. The glass is wet.
Yeah.
Why? Why would they not take a paper towel and wipe it? Yeah. And that's sort of a weird camera angle too, I might want to add.
Yeah.
But okay. I mean, I wasn't being that hypercritical of the listing.
No, me either. I just was like, oh my, a wet shower.
So. Yeah. I mean, I think it's a cool house. Oh, I guess was it a flip, Hamish? What do you think?
I don't believe so. When did it sell? Let me double check on this one. Oh, it doesn't tell me when it sold. Do you have when it sold on your?
I do, and let me revise this. What I said about the timeline. They actually originally listed it at $1,050,000 in June. And,
then I do think it's well.
And it's not indicated. Well, so let me look at the tax record and see when the ownership changed, because sometimes flippers will buy these homes off market, and in this case, it is not bought off market. It had been owned since 2017. Oh no, since 2020 by the same seller. So those sellers are the ones that did the work. So not likely to be a flip, and no flipper in their right mind would create a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. Like, you're smoking something, because you're now appealing to like 10% of the market. So not a flip, and originally listed at $1,050,000 in June. Cut the price to just under $1 million a couple of weeks after listing, and then withdrew it, and then brought it back. This whole withdraw, bring it back nonsense doesn't fool anybody, but they brought it back, and then they gently slid down the price all the way to $935. So more than $100 below the original list price.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good data point for Table Mesa. All right. Yeah. Next. Last one. Our last sale of the week, Hamish.
Peloton.
The Peloton.
You ready?
Yes. Let's get it started. 3601 Arapahoe Avenue, Unit D217, a 1,400 square foot 2-bedroom, 2-bath with 2 car spaces, built in 2008. I remember when the Peloton was first being marketed in 2004 and 2005. They were giving away a scooter if you bought a unit, and they were promising that if you put in your order put down a deposit before it was completed, you would not be priced out. The prices were going to likely keep increasing. It turned out prices fell off a cliff shortly after that because the market totally turned, and the Peloton finished 2 buildings and left 2 as basically core and shell. And they came in and refinished them eventually and rented them for years, those 2 buildings that they didn't sell. And eventually the developer did sell those when the market came back. Smart move for the developer. This particular 2-bedroom, 2-bath is on the 2nd floor, and it was listed for $835. That was the last list price. It originally listed it at $850 at the end of June. They cut the price a few times. Well, at one point they thought they could raise the price. I don't know exactly what that's about. Like, they cut it from $850 to $825, and then they said, you know what? Let's make it $835. We regret the $825,
Oops.
And that's when it went under contract, and it did sell for $820. So it's unclear what the story was with that game. It also went under contract twice. The first buyer bailed in August, and then the second buyer picked it up in September. So kind of a roller coaster for the seller, but not not a super rare roller coaster. That happens quite frequently. And this buyer, whose primary address was also Boulder, had owned it since 2014. They paid $490 for it in 2014. They sold it for $820. So that's almost $350,000 of upside for owning it for 10 years. Not a bad deal compared to what they paid for it. Oh, in the notes it says buyer number 1's loan fell through. No fault of condo. And the condo is currently non-warrantable for conforming loans. But First Bank can get loans of 25% down. So this is something to be aware of, is the warrantability of certain developments. So mixed use or developments that have more than 50% investor ownership are not eligible for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac financing, which makes them, quote, not warrantable, which means that you're now in the land of portfolio lending. And First Bank is the one that lent on this. They probably did like a 15-year fixed or an adjustable rate mortgage to make the deal happen. But overall, so that's the deal, right? I think it's a pretty decent deal for the buyer. It's hard to find high quality. 1,400 square feet is bigger than a Martin Acres ranch. It's bigger than this whole discussion of South Boulder ranches on the main. It's got an elevator. It has a fantastic health center building, multiple stories of really high quality health club facilities, including rooftop pool, hot tubs. You don't see that at any other association, not at that quality level. The closest second might be Gold Run, but then it's student infested. So, take that for what it is. It is not as high quality. It doesn't have the amazing theater that the Peloton does, all the high quality equipment, the community. And the build quality at the Peloton is really different than anything else in Boulder that I've seen. It was designed with sound insulation in mind. And so every client I've ever helped buy or sell in this unit have talked about how quiet it is. You should not hear your neighbor unless maybe they're banging a basketball on the floor. So that's a really big plus for people that don't want to live in an apartment building. So very few students, great views, an amazing restaurant. Basta is one of our favorites. It's right in the plaza. Reasonable distance to downtown and other types of shopping. Very few students. Did I already say that? And so $820 is the sale price on this particular unit. And just keep in mind when you buy something non-warrantable that there is a good chance that when you go to sell it, it will not sell as quickly and may not sell as much when the financing side is more challenging. And I don't know this. I do know this agent, so I'm not going to throw them under the bus, but I will throw the buy-side agent under the bus that screwed up the deal the first time. They should have not put it under contract till they verified their financing would work for this particular development. And that's one of the important things that agents need to know is when you're buying a condo, make sure you check warrantability with the lender. And that's another reason to use a local lender, because they know, without even looking it up, what's warrantable and what's not. All right, I'm sure you're holding up a timer, Hamish, and I'm done talking.
Okay. That was 5 minutes. Good stuff. Only thing is it's a huge balcony, and I'm going to call it like balcony level because the 2 stories above it don't have balconies, at least that I could see. But it doesn't show the view off the balcony. It goes out east, but I would still be curious as a buyer.
The upper levels definitely have balconies. There's 2 more levels, and they absolutely have balconies. But you probably is not going to have any impact to your...
Oh, they have itsy-bitsy ones, yeah. But yeah, we got to move. I've got to take off here in 20 minutes? No, 10 minutes.
Okay. All right. Where are you going?
I have to go do the stuff for Sophie.
Okay. All right. So let's move on. It's going to be difficult to cover all of this news quickly, but let's do our best and kind of give high-level information, and we'll provide links rather than go into a ton of detail. And if there's interest, let us know, and we can potentially talk about these things in more detail in another podcast. But we did touch on the Bamoka development. It's over 100,000 square feet of art space, residential space, commercial space, mostly residential space. And I'm pretty sure very few people really grasp how many residential units they're talking about putting in place up there. So take a look at the link in the show, the podcast notes, in the show notes. And I think this is going to be a huge plus. The takeaway is I think it's going to be a huge plus for the neighborhood, that what's there now is pretty low-level retail. It's kind of run down. The liquor store attracts a lot of homeless people. The cops are there all the time. And once this is redeveloped into a modern art building and residential property, along with some commercial, I think it'll be a huge improvement. And that should benefit some of the restaurants in Uptown Broadway and the Holiday neighborhood as well. But we'll certainly not do anything to help our traffic situation. So if you hate the traffic on Broadway, well, prepare for it to suck more in the future.
Well said, unfortunately. I think I'd love to see the Canisteria and La Choza and, you know, some of those establishments survive, but I don't think they will, unfortunately.
I mean, Boulder real estate is expensive for commercial, and it sucks that we lose our cheaper restaurants, our cheaper retail, our less expensive retail that serves people that are not quite as affluent. But the reality is that's
like really good food too, and like, you know, Canisteria is really good meat, and you know.
I don't go to the grocery store as much. In fact, I've been in there once. So I'm not the target person to buy my meat at that grocery, but I will say that the La Choza is a really inexpensive Mexican restaurant.
Best burritos I've ever had there. The al pastor.
I think there's better. I think Tierra Fuego is better. But with that said, it definitely served a lot of people that are workers and workforce people were eating there for lunch, and it sucks that they're going to likely lose that. But there is also the La Choza box off of Foothills Parkway, right across from the Volvo shop, the original La Choza. So you still got your La Choza, and you can hang out in the car lot there. Perfect. And check out the old Volvos.
Awesome. All right, now I'm happy.
Great.
All right, I've got the next.
Go for it.
Yeah, so the BERT is... I'll get you the proper name for the acronym in a moment, but it is an 8.5-mile trail, proposed trail between Erie and Boulder, set to cost roughly $30 million, and it has just been approved by the Boulder County Commissioners. This trail, I was going to get you the name for the acronym, but it's not on this article. So either way, the idea is a mixed-use trail that is operational and available to use throughout every season. So I'm curious if it'll be plowed or how that will work, or if it'll be a covered trail. I'm expecting there to be some lighting on it. But yeah, a really cool kind of trail between the two cities.
Well, I have a hard time believing there'll be lighting, but maybe that'll help explain why it's $3 million a mile.
30. Oh yeah.
Per mile. It's for a dirt trail. When I tell people Boulder is very expensive for construction, it also applies to infrastructure. And it's grading and dirt. I don't understand why it would be that expensive, but maybe it includes maintenance costs. Maybe there's right-of-ways that need to be purchased. I'm not in this world of building these things. I'm just shocked at how expensive it's going to be. But I'm also grateful that we're connecting our communities, because I'm an avid cyclist. I love all of our gravel paths and trails. You'll see those on my socials. I love it, but I hate how expensive it is. But I think it'll make our community more connected. And a lot of people live in Erie, and I'm sure they would love to ride their bikes not on roadways where they're risking their lives with distracted drivers, but on a beautiful bike path that's through scenic parts of our county. I'm in favor.
Completely agree. Yeah.
All right.
You're right about the 30 mil. All right, carrying on.
Pearl Street Mall Crawl. So here's the thing, Hamish. For decades, Boulder had this thing called the Mall Crawl. And people would show up, usually younger people in costume. And it was just a big scene and a giant party. And it got out of control. It was so big. The retailers hated it because they were getting a lot of damage to their shops. And Boulder shut it down by blocking the highway one year and getting all the newspapers and other media to say it was done, it was shut down. But the open secret is it never actually was shut down. The mall crawl continues to exist. It has continued to exist. I might be out there tomorrow. It persists, right? Like a good zombie. It didn't die. It just persisted. And so we can't go into any more detail for time. But I will likely be there tomorrow. It is a Boulder tradition that has continued despite officially being shut down.
Boulder still lives. Still right.
And this time next week, we're going to know who our president is, maybe. Or maybe it's going to be months of litigation. But we're just going to mention that it's happening because we're not going to talk about it anymore. You get that news from everyone else, not us.
Yeah, open any social media and elections everywhere. So.
But I will say we represent people of all political stripes without discrimination. And I'm also an independent, just so you're aware. And I hear very strong arguments on both sides. And I I can't wait till this election's over, and we will see you on the other side.
Well said. Okay, some
right.
Carveout time.
How much time have we got?
2.5 minutes per person.
What time do you have to end? You have 10 minutes? 15 minutes?
I've got to leave at 12:30.
Okay, well, then you better jump in.
Okay.
What are you working on, Hamish?
I'm going to run with the Air 3S Carveout, which is part of our mission to you, dear listener, and potential listings out there, and really just buyers looking to learn the area. We're investing in more updated equipment. The Air 3S is a new drone from DJI, and it has 2 focal lengths. So if you remember Carveout a couple episodes back, I was talking about telephoto lenses and zoom lenses kind of being the new fad. The Air 3S has that 70 millimeter full frame equivalent lens in it. So you're going to get some really cool compositions from a drone, some really cool aerials with a ton of compression and very neat kind of focal length. So super excited for that. There are some increased low light capabilities with it as well. So you think like your nighttime shots and your glowing windows and your prettiness. We also just got anti-collision lights for the drones, so we can be flying at nighttime. Really excited for that. And we got it ahead of the potential ban of DJI, so that was a strategic move too.
All right, don't crash it, because I'm a little concerned with flying with a zoom lens and you're looking at a screen, and in theory that makes you feel like you're closer to things, but I also think it will distort our perception of where the drone is in the air. So we obviously care an incredible amount on the quality of the content we produce, the quality of the marketing we produce for our sellers, and we've invested consistently in high-end equipment and skills for well over since House Einstein was founded. I would probably say we're approaching 50,000 just in our own current equipment inventory. And happy to do it, because it will, you have to get people to the listing if you want them to buy it. And that means really high quality marketing, and we can't really even hold our tongues when we see horrible marketing, horrible photography, and agents too cheap to pay for a professional photographer. It's mind-blowing. So ask your agents what you're getting when you before you sign that listing agreement. And so my Carveout, I'm excited to see that 3S. Hopefully I'll get to play with it. Hamish does our principal photography as our licensed drone pilot, but I occasionally will throw a drone up for fun and my own personal shots. And so the other thing I'm playing with a lot this week, and I don't know, we have a minute, are action cams and creative shot angles to try to tell better stories. So you might see in our next listing video both of these things. You might see some interesting 70 millimeter drone shots with the zoom lens. You might also see some creative shot angles to try to create more visually interesting and therefore engaging content that people actually watch, and then might feel encouraged enough or interested enough or curious enough to schedule a showing. And I think that's probably it. We'll take this one item out, Hamish, because we are out of time for Carveouts. But I wanted to do a quick wrap-up. Thank you so much for joining us today at the House Einstein Podcast. If you like this content, would like to see what we do in the local market, I would encourage you to check us out at houseeinstein.com. You can sign up for our newsletter. It is now back out. I just published the October edition, which covered a number of listings that we have not talked about on the pod, including active listings, and that's a newsletter for prospective clients. So it's a great way to get to know us if you're thinking about buying or selling real estate in the future. You can also check out our YouTube and, of course, our other socials on Instagram and Facebook. Thank you so much for joining us at the House Einstein Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We value you so deeply. Thanks for your comments, your feedback, your suggestions. And if you need to reach us, find us at houseeinstein.com.
Perfect.